The town was small, quiet, and forgotten by most people who lived outside of it. The streets were cracked, and the paint on the houses peeled with every passing season. The air always carried the smell of wet earth mixed with the faint odor of the nearby factory, a smell the boys had grown used to. In this town, 5 boys moved like shadows through life, unnoticed by most adults, but tightly bound together by circumstances and an unspoken promise that they would look out for each other no matter what. Each of them carried a story of hardship, a history of being let down by the people who were supposed to care for them, and a longing for something they had never really known, a real family. The oldest of the group was 14. He had a calm and careful way about him, the kind that made the younger boys feel safer even when there was no reason to feel safe. His eyes were serious, always watching, always thinking, as though he had grown up too quickly and had to learn to protect those around him. He often carried small responsibilities for the group, finding food when they were hungry, looking out for places to sleep, and making sure none of the boys got into too much trouble. Despite his quiet demeanor, he had a warmth that the others leaned on, a patience that held them together when life seemed too heavy. The second oldest was 13, a fiery and adventurous boy who loved to make jokes, even in times when laughter felt almost impossible. His energy often drew the others out of their own sadness, and he had a knack for finding small moments of joy in the bleakest surroundings. He would climb trees just to see the town from above, daring the others to follow him. And while they sometimes protested, they never really minded. His boldness was a kind of armor, hiding the fact that he too feared being alone. The middle boy, 12, was quiet and thoughtful. He didn't speak much unless spoken to, but when he did, his words carried weight. He noticed details others missed, like the small cracks in the wall of the abandoned house they sometimes used for shelter, or the way the wind moved through the broken windows. He had a curiosity that made him spend hours wandering the edges of the town, collecting pieces of things that fascinated him: a shiny button, a piece of colored glass, a feather. These small treasures became stories he shared with the others, and they always listened, captivated by his imagination. The fourth boy was 10, small and fragile-looking, but with a heart that was larger than his size suggested. He had the tendency to worry, and the group often had to reassure him that everything would be okay, even when it didn't seem like it would be. His eyes were always searching for kindness, and though he tried to hide it, the boy felt the pain of abandonment more sharply than the others. He was sensitive to emotions, often comforting the others in his own quiet way. When the older boys felt the weight of the world pressing down, the youngest was 8, just barely old enough to understand the depth of their situation, but old enough to feel the sting of it. He clung to the others, especially the oldest, as though they were his only link to safety and warmth. Despite his small size, he had a curious spirit, asking questions about everything he saw, wanting to understand the world that seemed so harsh to him. The others answered as best they could, sometimes with patience, sometimes with exasperation, but always with care. The boys had grown up without a consistent home. Some had lived in foster care, bouncing from house to house, while others had been left by relatives who could not care for them. They learned early on that adults could not always be trusted to stay. Most people in the town barely noticed them, passing by with averted gaze or assuming the boys were troublemakers. But trouble was not what they were. They were simply 5 boys trying to survive, trying to hold on to each other in a world that had forgotten them. On a cold morning, the boys huddled together on the steps of an old abandoned community center. They had slept there the night before, sharing an old blanket that smelled of mildew and dust. The wind blew through the broken windows, making their teeth chatter, but they stayed close, finding warmth in each other's presence. The oldest boy had managed to get a small bag of bread from a local bakery that had leftover scraps, and they shared it among themselves, careful to make sure everyone got a piece. They ate in silence, the quiet only broken by the sound of the wind and the distant hum of the factory after breakfast. They set out on their daily routine. They wandered the streets not because they had anywhere to go, but because moving helped them forget, even for a little while, the emptiness that followed them wherever they went. The boys had a system for survival. They knew which store would sometimes throw away unsold food, which alleys were safe to play in without being chased off, and which adults might offer a kind word or a smile. They navigated the town like it was their own little kingdom, unseen and unnoticed, yet always together. Evenings were the hardest. That was when the loneliness became most apparent. The world grew quiet, shadows stretching across the broken sidewalks. The boys had to find places to sleep that offered some sense of safety. Sometimes it was the old community center, sometimes a disused warehouse, sometimes an empty room in a house that had been abandoned. They learned to make these places comfortable, turning trash into makeshift beds, finding warmth in small fires or in each other's company. Despite the hardships, the boys shared moments of joy. They played simple games, ran races through the empty streets, and told stories that made them laugh until their sides hurt. They created imaginary worlds where they were heroes, kings, and explorers, forgetting for a little while that they were alone in reality. It was in these moments that the depth of their bond shone brightest. They had learned to rely on one another not just for survival, but for emotional support, a comfort that most children took for granted. One afternoon, they sat by the river that ran on the edge of town. The water was murky, but it reflected the late afternoon sun in glimmers that seemed almost magical. The oldest boy spoke softly about his dreams of a better life, a home where they would not have to hide or scavenge for food. The adventurous boy interrupted with jokes, making everyone laugh, while the thoughtful one pointed out shapes in the clouds, weaving stories that captured their imagination. The two youngest watched, soaking in the warmth of their companionship. And for a moment, it felt as though nothing could touch them, but reality was never far. The boys knew that each day was a challenge, that hunger, cold, and danger were constant companions. They had been let down by adults before, and they had learned to keep their hopes small, to protect themselves from disappointment. Yet, even with their hearts guarded, there was a quiet longing that persisted, a desire for something more than survival. For a life where they could be loved without conditions or fear. On weekends, when the town seemed emptier and the adults busied themselves with chores or social events, the boys would sneak into the library. It was an old building with worn carpets and dusty shelves, but it was safe, warm, and filled with stories of faraway lands. They would sit on the floor, flipping through books and whispering to each other, imagining lives that were different from their own. The youngest loved fairy tales. The adventurous boy liked action stories. The thoughtful one enjoyed tales of mystery, and the two oldest preferred books that made them think. In the library, they found a rare sense of peace, a quiet escape from the harshness of their daily lives. The boys often spoke of their dreams in these moments, though carefully, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile hope they held. They imagined having a mother who would care for them, someone who would prepare meals, listen to their fears, and love them without asking for anything in return. It was a dream they had all whispered to each other in the dark of the community center, a secret hope that they carried silently. Afraid to believe it could ever come true, even in their daily struggles, there were small victories. They learned to repair clothes that were torn, to cook simple meals with limited ingredients, and to find joy in small things, a warm loaf of bread, a sunny afternoon, or the laughter of a friend. Their resilience was remarkable, shaped by necessity and the need to protect each other. They had become experts in adapting to life's challenges, and though the world had been harsh, they faced it together, giving each other the courage to keep moving forward as the sun set on another day. The boys gathered once again in their makeshift home. They huddled under their thin blanket, sharing stories, jokes, and dreams. The cold crept in, but they were not alone. Each boy knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they had each other. In that small, forgotten town, among cracked streets and peeling paint, 5 boys had built something remarkably a family of their own making, bound not by blood, but by loyalty, love, and the shared understanding of what it meant to survive. And so, life went on. Days were hard, nights were colder, and the world often seemed indifferent to their existence. Yet despite everything, the boys held on to a quiet hope. They did not know when or if their dream of finding a real mother would ever come true. But deep inside, a spark remained, a longing for love and care that would not fade. a wish that one day someone would see them not as lost boys, but as children who deserved a family, warmth, and a place to belong. And it was this hope, fragile but persistent, that would guide them into the next chapter of their lives. One morning, as the boys wandered through the town searching for food and shelter, they noticed a new face. A woman had arrived in their quiet town, walking slowly with an air of calm that seemed almost out of place. She looked older than most of the adults they saw, with kind eyes and a soft smile that seemed to reach even the corners of her face where worry lines had settled. She carried a bag that looked heavy and moved with care, as if she was trying not to disturb anything or anyone. The boys watched her from a distance, curious but cautious, unsure if she was someone to trust. The woman spent her days volunteering at the old community center. It was the same building the boys sometimes slept in, though they never expected anyone to notice them there. She cleaned, organized, and spoke to the few people who came by, always with patience and kindness. She noticed small things, like the broken furniture or the dirt in the corners, and quietly fixed them when no one was watching. There was something gentle about her, the way she made people feel seen even without saying much. The boys kept an eye on her, intrigued but wary. Their past experiences with adults had taught them that kindness often came with strings attached. Yet, there was something different about this woman. She seemed to care not for what she could gain, but simply because it felt right to help. One day, as the youngest boy wandered too close to a street full of passing cars, she appeared seemingly out of nowhere and grabbed his hand, pulling him back to safety. Her voice was soft but firm, and for a moment, the boy felt something he had never felt before: protection, care, and concern without judgment. The boys began to approach her cautiously, testing the waters. At first, they asked small questions about the town, about where she came from, and why she was helping people. She answered honestly, never hiding anything, but also never sharing too much about herself. She asked questions in return, gentle questions that made the boys think about their day, their feelings, and their hopes. Slowly, they started to respond, opening small windows into their lives. Over time, the woman found ways to include the boys in her daily tasks. She gave them small chores at the community center, like arranging books, cleaning tables, or sweeping floors. She praised their efforts and treated them with respect, making them feel useful and important. The boys were surprised at how much this mattered. They had spent years feeling invisible, and now someone was noticing them for who they were, not just for the trouble they might cause. The woman also brought small gifts when she could. Sometimes it was a piece of fruit, sometimes a book, or even a small toy she found at the market. She never gave too much, knowing the boys had to remain independent. But the gesture itself was enough to make them feel special. They started to trust her little by little, the walls they had built around themselves beginning to crack. Laughter became more common when she was around, and even the smallest victories, like finishing a chore or finding a clean place to sit, were celebrated together. One chilly afternoon, the woman invited the boys to help her with a simple project. She had found some old blankets that were torn, and she asked them to help her mend them. The boys hesitated at first, unsure of what to do, but she guided them patiently, showing them how to thread a needle and stitch the fabric together. As they worked, she told stories about her childhood, of small adventures and mistakes she had made, always speaking with honesty and warmth. The boys listened, fascinated, feeling a connection that was new and strange, yet comforting. They were beginning to see her not just as a helper, but as someone who cared deeply for them. The woman also made time to teach them small life skills. She showed them how to cook simple meals over a small stove, how to wash clothes properly, and how to keep their little living spaces organized. She never scolded them for mistakes, but instead encouraged them to learn and grow. Even the youngest boy, who was often afraid of failure, began to try new things, inspired by her patience and belief in their abilities. Slowly, the boys realized that having someone care for them didn't mean they were weak. It meant they could learn, grow, and feel safe at the same time. On weekends, she took the boys to the park. It was a small park with a few swings, a dusty sandbox, and a pond where ducks floated lazily. The boys had never experienced outings like this before. They ran, played, and even tried feeding the ducks, laughing in a way that surprised even themselves. For a few hours, the world felt lighter, and the shadows of their past seemed to lift, just enough for them to breathe freely. They began to look forward to these moments, counting down the days until the next trip, relishing the warmth and care that she brought into their lives. The boys slowly started to call her Mom, though quietly, when they were alone. It was a word they had whispered to each other in the dark, a secret hope that they had carried for years. Saying it aloud felt daring, almost forbidden, yet comforting. She never forced them to call her anything, but when she heard it, she smiled. A gentle smile that made them feel seen and loved in a way they had never experienced before. For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a life where someone truly cared for them. Even the challenging moments were handled with care. When one of the boys got into a minor argument with another, she would sit them down and help them talk it through. She never took sides but encouraged understanding, teaching them to express their feelings without fear. The boys learned to communicate in ways they hadn't before, and the group became even closer as a result. Her guidance was subtle, yet it changed the way they interacted with each other, slowly building a stronger sense of family among them. The boys also noticed the woman's small acts of kindness toward other people in town. She would help an elderly neighbor carry groceries, stop to talk to the children at the school, or leave a warm meal at the door of someone who needed it. She never sought recognition, and often the people she helped barely noticed her efforts. The boys watched quietly, learning by example that caring for others didn't need an audience. It was its own reward. They began to understand that love and kindness were choices, something they could offer to others, even when the world had been unkind to them. One day, the woman asked the boys to help her plant a small garden near the community center. They dug holes, planted seeds, and watered the soil carefully. As they worked, she explained that plants needed patience, care, and attention to grow, just like people. The boys listened intently, understanding the lesson even if they didn't realize it at first. By the end of the day, they had a small patch of earth with tiny sprouts beginning to grow. The boys felt proud, a sense of accomplishment they had rarely experienced. And for a brief moment, the world seemed full of possibilities. Over time, the woman became a part of the boys' routines. They looked forward to her presence, relied on her guidance, and shared their small victories with her. They no longer felt entirely alone, even when life remained difficult, when food was scarce, when the nights were cold. When the town seemed indifferent, they had someone who genuinely cared for them. It was a new kind of comfort, one that they had never known but now could not imagine living without. The boys' bond with the woman deepened in ways that were both subtle and profound. They began to share their fears, hopes, and dreams with her, revealing parts of themselves they had kept hidden from the world. She listened without judgment, offering advice when needed, but more often simply being there, present and steady. The boys began to realize that she was different from the adults who had disappointed them in the past. She stayed, she cared, and she loved them for who they were. Even the oldest, who had always carried the weight of responsibility for the group, felt a sense of relief. For the first time, he didn't have to bear everything alone. The woman shared the burden with them, guiding the boys and supporting them in ways that were both practical and emotional. He began to trust again, slowly letting go of the constant vigilance that had defined his life for so long. The youngest boy, who had often been afraid of the world, began to speak more openly, asking questions, exploring new places, and taking small risks. He felt safe enough to try new things, knowing that the woman would be there to support him. The two middle boys, one quiet and thoughtful, the other lively and adventurous, found new ways to grow and express themselves. They learned patience, kindness, and the joy of shared experiences, all guided by the woman's steady presence. In the evenings, when the work of the day was done, the woman would sit with the boys and listen to their stories. She never interrupted, never dismissed their experiences, but instead validated their feelings, helping them process the complex emotions they carried. They talked about their dreams of a better life, their fears of being abandoned, and their longing for a true family. For the first time, they felt heard, understood, and valued. The days passed, each one filled with small moments of care, learning, and laughter. The boys grew to trust the woman completely, feeling a sense of belonging that they had never known. They began to imagine a future where life could be different, where love and family were not just dreams, but a reality. Even in a town that had seemed indifferent, they had found someone who chose to see them, to care for them, to be a constant presence in their lives. And so the woman became more than just a helper or a visitor. She became a part of the boys' lives, a source of comfort and guidance, a mother figure they had longed for. In her presence, they found hope, security, and the possibility of a life filled with care and love. For the first time, they allowed themselves to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, someone truly cared for them, someone who would not leave, and someone who could become the family they had always dreamed of. As days turned into weeks, the boys' relationship with the woman grew stronger. They began to understand that she was not only kind and caring, but also someone who truly wanted to help them build a better life. Every interaction they had with her left a mark, a small reminder that someone could genuinely care without expecting anything in return. The boys started to rely on her presence, her advice, and even her small acts of kindness, which began to feel like the foundation of a life they had never imagined they could have. The woman started teaching the boys more than just daily survival skills. She introduced them to basic reading, writing, and arithmetic in fun ways, often turning learning into games. She would take them to the library and encourage them to pick books that interested them. Some days they would sit in a circle, sharing the stories they had read and discussing the characters as if they were friends. These moments sparked curiosity in the boys, and they began to see learning not as a chore, but as a tool to explore the world beyond the limits of their small town. The adventurous boy, who had always been full of energy, was the first to embrace these lessons eagerly. He loved discovering new stories, imagining himself as the hero in each tale, and would excitedly recount every detail to the others. The quiet and thoughtful boy followed soon after, captivated by stories that challenged him to think and imagine. The two youngest boys were slower to adapt, but began to participate as they grew more comfortable. Encouraged by the woman's patience and gentle guidance, even the oldest boy, who had carried the burden of leadership for so long, found joy in learning alongside them, surprised by how much he enjoyed it. With the arrival of the warmer season, the woman began planning small outdoor activities. She would take the boys on short hikes around the outskirts of the town, showing them how to observe nature and appreciate the little things, the sound of birds, the smell of wildflowers, or the way sunlight filtered through leaves. The boys, who had spent most of their time in gray streets and abandoned buildings, were amazed by the beauty of the world they had been missing. These outings became their favorite times, filled with laughter, exploration, and the growing sense of safety that came from having someone dependable with them. One afternoon, during one of these hikes, the boys stumbled upon a small clearing by a stream. The woman suggested they sit and have a picnic with the sandwiches they had brought. They spread out a blanket, and for a moment, the world felt far away. The oldest boy glanced at the flowing water, the sunlight dancing on the surface, and felt a rare sense of peace. He realized how much he had longed for normal moments like this, moments of simple joy without fear or worry. The adventurous boy tried skipping stones across the water, laughing each time one sank too quickly. The thoughtful boy noticed the patterns in the ripples and shared his observations. The two youngest played quietly, holding hands, feeling the comfort of being with someone who cared. The woman also made efforts to celebrate the boys' small achievements. If one of them learned a new skill, helped someone else, or made a thoughtful choice, she praised them sincerely. The oldest boy, who often carried guilt for failing to protect his friends in the past, felt a strange new sense of pride. He was learning that mistakes did not define him, and that his efforts mattered. The adventurous boy, who often sought attention, learned that recognition could come from genuine appreciation rather than empty praise. The two middle boys and the youngest felt seen, valued, and understood in ways they never had before. Evenings became special in their little household. The woman would prepare a simple meal, and they would gather around the table, sharing stories from their day. They talked about school, the books they were reading, their dreams, and even their fears. For the first time, the boys experienced a sense of belonging that went beyond survival. They were not just 5 boys navigating a harsh world. They were part of something larger. A family where they mattered. The woman encouraged the boys to express their emotions openly. The oldest boy, who had always felt the need to be strong and unyielding, began sharing his fears and frustrations. The adventurous boy, who had used humor as a shield, discovered that it was okay to be serious sometimes. The quiet and thoughtful boy found his voice. The 2 youngest found comfort in expressing sadness or excitement without fear of judgment. Through her guidance, the boys learned that emotions were not weaknesses, but a natural part of being human. The community began to notice the change in the boys. They walked with more confidence, spoke more clearly, and even smiled more often. Adults who had previously ignored them began to greet them with recognition. The boys felt a quiet pride, understanding that their growth was not just a result of chance, but of consistent care, patience, and love. The woman never boasted about her role, but the boys knew it was her guidance that had made the difference. During weekends, she organized small trips to places they had never seen. They visited a nearby orchard where they picked fruit, a small-town library with new books, and even a local bakery where they learned how bread was made. Each trip was filled with wonder and excitement, moments that the boys would treasure and talk about long after returning home. The youngest boy would often ask endless questions. The adventurous boy would find new ways to play and explore. The quiet and thoughtful boy would observe, storing every detail in his mind. The oldest boy, though initially reserved, started joining in the fun, appreciating the joy that came from simply being present. One day, the woman introduced a small project for the boys to work on together. She asked them to build a small birdhouse using old wood and simple tools. At first, the boys were unsure, never having attempted such a task before. The woman guided them patiently, showing them how to measure, cut, and assemble the pieces. They worked as a team, learning to listen, cooperate, and support each other. When the birdhouse was finally completed and placed near the garden, the boys felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had created something tangible, something that symbolized growth, teamwork, and care. The boys began sharing their own dreams with her more openly. The oldest spoke about wanting a stable home, the adventurous boy about exploring the world, the thoughtful boy about learning everything he could, and the 2 youngest about simple things, having friends, pets, and a place to call their own. The woman listened with patience and encouragement, helping them think of small steps they could take toward their dreams. Her belief in them inspired hope, a hope they had not dared to feel before. With her guidance, the boys began to take more responsibility for themselves and for each other. They started organizing their living space more efficiently, cooking meals with less supervision and finding creative solutions to daily problems. The woman always encouraged independence while remaining a steady presence, a balance that taught the boys both resilience and trust. They were learning that family was not just about care, but also about shared responsibility, respect, and cooperation. Nighttime became a moment of reflection and bonding. After simple dinners, the boys would gather with the woman, sometimes telling stories, sometimes sitting quietly as she read from a book. The warmth of their little home, the sound of her voice, and the shared presence created a sense of security that none of them had experienced before. They felt safe to dream, to express themselves, and to simply be children without fear or judgment. Even challenges were met with her support. If one of the boys struggled with a task or felt upset, she would sit with them, helping them work through the problem calmly. She never scolded or pressured them, understanding that mistakes were part of learning. The boys began to see challenges as opportunities rather than threats, gaining confidence and resilience with each passing day. The relationship between the woman and the boys continued to deepen in subtle but powerful ways. She remembered the smallest details about each of them, their favorite foods, their fears, their little habits. Oh, she would surprise them occasionally, leaving a note of encouragement or preparing a small treat. The boys began to feel truly seen, understood, and loved. For the first time, they realized that family was not just about being together, but about caring deeply and consistently for one another. One afternoon, the woman organized a small celebration for the boys. She baked a simple cake with the help of the oldest and the adventurous boy, while the two youngest decorated the room with handmade paper decorations. The thoughtful boy helped set the table and arrange the chairs. It was a small event, but to the boys, it felt monumental. They laughed, shared stories, and for a few hours, the world outside seemed distant and unimportant. In that moment, they felt what it truly meant to belong, to be part of a family that valued them. The days continued in this rhythm, filled with learning, laughter, care, and the occasional challenge. The boys began to feel more secure, more confident, and more capable than ever before. They were growing not just physically, but emotionally, learning to trust, to dream, and to believe in the possibility of a better life. The woman remained, their steady guide, a presence that gave them stability and love, showing them that family could be chosen and nurtured, not only inherited. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between the boys and the woman became unbreakable. They shared in each other's joys and fears, successes and failures, forming a deep, lasting connection. The boys had found a mother figure, someone, who not only cared for them but also believed in them, guided them, and helped them grow. In her presence, they discovered that love could be patient, consistent, and unwavering, and that family could be built on trust, understanding, and care. The world outside remained harsh and unpredictable, but within the walls of their small home and the presence of the woman, the boys experienced a sense of stability and belonging that they had never known. They laughed more freely, dreamed more boldly, and faced each day with courage. They had discovered that even in a world that often seemed uncaring, they could find warmth, guidance, and unconditional love. The woman had become more than a caretaker. She had become the heart of their little family, the person who made life brighter, safer, and full of hope for the 5 boys who had longed for a mother and finally found one. Life had settled into a rhythm for the 5 boys and the woman who had become their mother figure. Days were filled with learning, laughter, and care, and the boys had grown to trust her completely. They shared secrets, dreams, and small victories. And for the first time, the world felt a little kinder. But one afternoon, that fragile sense of safety began to tremble in a way none of them expected. The quiet and thoughtful boy had gone exploring in the small attic of the community center, a place they sometimes used to store old furniture and supplies. While moving a stack of dusty boxes, he noticed a folder tucked away in the corner, partially hidden under an old coat. Curious, he pulled it out and carefully opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, and letters, things that looked official and serious. At first, he didn't understand what they all meant. But as he flipped through them, a sinking feeling began to grow in his chest. He called the oldest boy over to take a look. Together, they examined the papers in silence, their eyes widening as pieces of information became clear. The documents revealed a past filled with complications, different names, previous addresses far from the town, and legal records that hinted at trouble with the law. The photographs showed the woman in settings and situations the boys had never imagined. Letters written by unknown people suggested she had been involved in matters that were serious and possibly dangerous. The boys were stunned. Their mother figure, the person they trusted and loved, seemed to have a past that did not match the image they had held of her. The boys shared their findings quietly, their hearts pounding with confusion and fear. How could someone who had cared so deeply for them, who had been patient, kind, and loving, have a past filled with secrets? The youngest boy clung to the oldest, tears forming in his eyes, afraid that this revelation meant she might leave them too, just as others had. The adventurous boy, usually full of confidence and jokes, sat in silence, his mind racing with questions he could not answer. Even the oldest boy, who had tried to protect everyone from disappointment, felt a wave of uncertainty that left him shaking. They decided to confront her carefully. They waited until the evening when they were all together in their small home. With trembling hands and uncertain voices, they showed her the papers. The woman's expression changed immediately, a shadow of worry crossing her face. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly, signaling that she had expected this day might come, though she had hoped it wouldn't. She began to speak, her voice calm but serious. She admitted that her past was complicated. She had made mistakes. some of them serious, that had forced her to leave her old life behind. She explained that she had chosen to start over in this small town, not to run from her past, but to find a purpose in helping children who were lost and alone. She told them that she had always wanted to be someone they could trust, someone who could offer them the stability and love she had never been able to give herself earlier in her life. Her words were honest, but they did not erase the shock the boys felt. The quiet and thoughtful boy listened intently, trying to understand, while the adventurous boy struggled with anger and confusion. The oldest boy, who had taken responsibility for shielding the others, felt torn between wanting to believe her and fearing betrayal. The two youngest boys felt a mix of relief and fear. They were relieved that she was speaking honestly, but afraid that this revelation might change everything they had built together. The woman continued, explaining that the mistakes of her past did not define her present or her intentions. She shared stories of moments when she had chosen to act with kindness, when she had put the needs of children above her own safety or comfort. She emphasized that her love for the boys was real and unwavering, and that she had no intention of leaving them. She asked for their trust, acknowledging that it might take time to rebuild. The boys sat in silence for a long time after she spoke. Their minds raced with conflicting emotions. Could they continue to trust someone who had hidden so much from them? Could love and care exist alongside a past filled with mistakes? The youngest boy whispered that he still loved her, despite everything. The others hesitated, but found themselves nodding slowly. They realized that while the past was complicated, the present, the care, guidance, and love she offered them was real and tangible. Over the next few days, the boys struggled to reconcile what they had learned with their feelings for her. They observed her actions closely, noticing the same patience, warmth, and commitment they had come to rely on. The oldest boy began to understand that while the past might be complicated, it did not diminish the care she showed every day. The adventurous boy, though still wary, started to see that her intentions were genuine. The quiet and thoughtful boy processed the information by asking questions, seeking clarity and understanding. The two youngest boys found comfort in each other's presence, holding hands and sharing quiet words of reassurance. The woman did not try to force forgiveness or trust. She continued her daily routines with the boys, maintaining the same kindness, patience, and guidance that had first drawn them to her. She included them in decisions, asked for their input, and reminded them that they were all part of a family where honesty and care mattered most. Her actions slowly reinforced the truth of her words, showing the boys that she was committed to them despite her past. One afternoon, the woman suggested they work on a project together. They decided to create a scrapbook documenting the happy moments they had shared since she arrived. They included drawings, photographs, and written memories, celebrating small victories. Trips to the park, meals shared, and learning moments. As they worked, the boys began to see their connection with her, not as dependent on perfection, but on consistent care, shared experiences, and love that had grown over time. The scrapbook became a symbol of trust, healing, and the resilience of their bond. The oldest boy, who had felt the weight of responsibility, began to express his feelings more openly. He admitted that he had feared losing her, feared that her past would undo everything they had built. The woman listened patiently, acknowledging his fears without judgment. She reminded him that while the past could not be erased, the present was theirs to shape together. This conversation allowed the oldest boy to release some of the burden he had carried for so long, realizing that trust and love required patience and understanding. The adventurous boy, who had been quick to anger, found himself asking more questions and seeking reassurance. The woman answered honestly, explaining that everyone has a past, but what matters is the way we choose to act in the present. Slowly, he began to accept that love and care could coexist with complexity, and that he could still feel safe despite the revelations. The quiet and thoughtful boy continued to process, observing and reflecting, while the two youngest boys found comfort in the daily routines that had always brought them stability. As weeks passed, the initial shock faded. The boys still remembered the discovery, but they no longer allowed it to define their relationship. They saw the woman's consistent care, her patience, and her dedication to them is evidence that love and family could exist even when the past was complicated. They began to rebuild trust, one small moment at a time. Learning that forgiveness and understanding were powerful tools that allowed them to move forward together, the woman also encouraged the boys to see the value in resilience and redemption. She shared stories of people who had made mistakes, but found ways to change, to help others, and to build meaningful lives. The boys listened, inspired by the idea that people could grow beyond their past, and that love and care were not limited by previous errors. This perspective helped them understand their own struggles and the importance of supporting one another as they navigated life's challenges, even in small daily activities. The boys noticed how her presence continued to shape their lives. She helped them with schoolwork, guided them in problem-solving, and encouraged them to express themselves creatively. She celebrated achievements, comforted failures, and maintained a steady, reassuring presence. Her consistent care reinforced the truth that while her past might have been complex, her love and dedication were unwavering. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, the youngest boy asked quietly if she would always stay with them. The woman smiled and nodded, her eyes full of warmth. She explained that while life could be unpredictable, she had chosen to be with them, to guide them, and to love them as a family. The boys felt a sense of relief and security, understanding that their bond was stronger than fear, doubt, or past mistakes. The discovery of her past had been a moment of fear and uncertainty, but it ultimately deepened their connection. The boys learned that love could be complex, that people were capable of change, and that trust required time, patience, and consistent care. They saw that family was not defined by perfection, but by the willingness to support, nurture, and care for one another in the following weeks. The boys and the woman continued their routines, strengthened by the understanding that relationships could survive challenges and revelations. They laughed, learned, and explored together, building memories that would endure. The initial shock of the discovery became a turning point, teaching them resilience, empathy, and the power of love that persists despite the complexities of the past. The boys began to embrace their lives with renewed hope. They understood that while the world could be unpredictable and people's pasts could be complicated, the present offered opportunities for connection, care, and growth. Their bond with the woman had endured the test of truth, and in doing so, it became even stronger. They had learned that love was not about perfection, but about presence, honesty, and unwavering support. And so life continued, filled with small victories, lessons learned, and moments of joy. The boys had faced a challenge that could have broken them, but instead, it brought them closer together. They had discovered the depth of human complexity and the capacity for forgiveness, trust, and love. The woman, once a figure of mystery, had become a steadfast mother in every sense that mattered. Together, they moved forward, stronger, more resilient, and bound by a connection that no revelation could undo. Months had passed since the boys had discovered the woman's past, and the initial shock had gradually settled into understanding. They had learned that the past did not define her love or her commitment to them. Instead, it became a part of the story they all shared. A reminder that life was complex and that forgiveness, trust, and care could create a family stronger than the hardships that life presented. Each boy had grown in his own way, becoming more confident, resilient, and open to the world around him. The oldest boy had learned to carry responsibility differently. He no longer felt the need to protect everyone from every danger on his own. He understood that family was a shared effort, and that caring for each other meant trusting in the presence and guidance of someone who genuinely loved them. He helped guide the others, but now with patience and confidence, allowing them to grow while still providing support when needed. He had learned that leadership did not mean control, it meant compassion, guidance, and understanding. The adventurous boy, who had once relied on humor and bravado to hide his fears, discovered the strength in vulnerability. He allowed himself to express doubts, ask questions, and even admit when he needed help. Through this, he strengthened his bond with the woman and the other boys. He became more thoughtful in his actions, learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. His energy remained, but it was now balanced with insight and care for those around him, the quiet and thoughtful. Boy continued to observe the world with curiosity and insight. He had learned to ask questions not only of the world, but also of himself, exploring his own emotions and understanding the people around him. He became a source of calm and wisdom among the group, helping the others reflect on their choices and understand each other better. His patience and empathy were valuable gifts that strengthened the family bond. The two youngest boys, who had once clung to the older ones for comfort, grew more independent while still seeking reassurance when needed. They learned to express their feelings and needs clearly, gaining confidence in their abilities and trusting in the care of the woman and their older brothers. They laughed more freely, played more boldly, and allowed themselves to dream about a future where love and safety were constants rather than rare occurrences. The woman continued to be the heart of their family. She encouraged them to pursue their interests, nurtured their talents, and celebrated their successes. She was patient with mistakes, guiding them gently and helping them see that setbacks were opportunities to learn and grow. Her consistency and care created a sense of stability that the boys had never experienced before. They began to understand that love was not conditional, and that family was built through presence, trust, and shared experiences. Together, they began to create new traditions. They spent weekends baking together, exploring nearby woods, or simply sitting in the park talking about their dreams and experiences. Each day brought small achievements, reading a difficult book, mastering a new skill, helping someone else, in each was celebrated with genuine pride and joy. The boys learned that life was a series of moments, and that happiness could be found even in simple, everyday activities when shared with those who cared. One evening, the woman suggested that they create a time capsule to capture the memories they had built together. The boys eagerly agreed, each choosing items that represented their personalities, experiences, and growth. They included small drawings, letters to their future selves, photographs, and even tiny trinkets they had collected over the months. As they buried the capsule in the garden, the oldest boy felt a deep sense of hope. He realized that their lives, once filled with uncertainty and fear, were now marked by love, trust, and the possibility of a brighter future. The boys also began to look beyond their immediate world. They attended school more regularly, encouraged by the woman's gentle insistence. They studied not just for grades, but to learn and explore the world around them. The adventurous boy discovered a talent for storytelling, the quiet and thoughtful boy for observation and analysis, and the two youngest for creativity and imagination. The oldest boy found strength in mentoring the others, guiding them academically and emotionally, and discovering pride in their collective growth. The bond between the boys and the woman grew deeper through challenges as well. When disagreements arose, they learned to resolve them with honesty and respect. When fears emerged, whether of failure, of loss, or of the unknown, they faced them together. The woman encouraged them to express emotions openly, validating their feelings while helping them develop resilience and perspective. Through this, the boys learned that love was not just about joy, but also about support during difficult times. One memorable day, the woman suggested they create a mural on the wall of the community center. She provided paint, brushes, and encouragement, but allowed the boys to lead the project creatively. They painted scenes of nature, family, and friendship, capturing their journey together and the growth they had achieved. The mural became a symbol of their bond, a visible testament to the love, trust, and creativity that had flourished in their lives. Each brushstroke was a reflection of their hearts, a celebration of the family they had built. The community began to notice the transformation in the boys. Their confidence, kindness, and maturity stood out, drawing attention from neighbors, teachers, and other adults. The boys realized that while their past had shaped them, their present and future were theirs to shape as well. They felt proud, not just of their achievements, but of the love and care they shared as a family. The woman, aware of the significance of their journey, encouraged them to think about the future. She asked them to imagine the kind of lives they wanted, values they wanted to uphold, and the relationships they wished to build. The boys began to dream boldly, knowing that they had a foundation of love, support, and guidance to help them reach those dreams. They imagined careers, adventures, friendships, and a family life filled with warmth and care. For the first time, the world seemed full of possibility rather than limitation. The 5 boys also discovered the joy of helping others. Inspired by the woman's example, they volunteered in small ways, helping neighbors, assisting at the community center, or supporting each other's learning. They realized that the care they received could be shared, and that giving back brought a sense of fulfillment and connection. This reinforced the idea that family and community were intertwined, and that love and kindness could extend beyond their immediate circle. As seasons changed, the boys and the woman celebrated milestones together. Birthdays, small victories, and even simple achievements became occasions for gratitude and joy. They reflected on how far they had come, acknowledging the hardships they had endured and the growth they had achieved. Each celebration was not just about the event itself, but about the love, effort, and resilience that had made it possible. The youngest boy, once timid and fearful, had grown into a confident child who expressed his ideas and emotions freely. The adventurous boy had learned to balance boldness with thoughtfulness. The quiet and thoughtful boy had developed wisdom and insight beyond his years. The oldest boy had discovered the power of leadership through guidance rather than control. The 2 youngest, having grown in confidence and trust, now contributed actively to their family's daily life. Together, they formed a cohesive, loving, supportive unit. The woman continued to nurture their growth, always reminding them that mistakes were part of learning and that love was not diminished by imperfection. She encouraged them to pursue passions, embrace curiosity, and develop empathy. Her guidance helped them navigate the complexities of life with confidence, resilience, and understanding. The boys had come to see her not just as a caretaker, but as the heart of their family, a source of unwavering love, wisdom, and support in the quiet moments. When the boys reflected on their journey, they realized how far they had come. They had moved from loneliness and uncertainty to trust, love, and stability. They had faced challenges, discovered truths, and learned to forgive, adapt, and grow. They had found not just a mother figure, but a family that believed in them, nurtured them, and shared in every triumph and struggle. They understood that life would still present challenges, but now they faced the future with courage, knowing they had each other. One evening, as the sun set over the small town, the boys gathered with the woman in the garden, sitting quietly and watching the colors of the sky. The wind carried the scent of flowers and fresh earth, and for a moment, the world seemed perfect. They held hands, shared smiles, and felt the warmth of belonging that had once seemed impossible. The youngest boy whispered that he loved her, and the others echoed the sentiment, their voices carrying a sense of certainty and peace. The woman smiled, tears in her eyes, feeling the depth of the bond they had created together. She knew that their journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. She had become their mother, not just by choice, but through the love, trust, and care they had built together. In that moment, they were not 5 boys and a woman. They were a family, complete and unbroken, ready to face the world together. And so, life continued, filled with love, learning, and shared experiences. The boys grew stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, guided by the woman who had chosen to be their mother. They discovered that family was not just about blood or perfection, but about presence, commitment, and unwavering care. They had found what they had longed for: a home, a mother, and a family that would stand by them no matter what. Their hearts were full of hope, their spirits resilient, and their bond unshakable. A testament to the power of love, trust, and the human capacity for growth and connection.